May 1945. The war in Europe is over, but the dust has not yet settled. In a commandeered German villa somewhere in Bavaria, the smell of coal smoke and leather mingles with the sharp, antiseptic tang of a field headquarters. General George S. Patton sits behind a wide desk, cluttered with maps, dispatches, and the detritus of a campaign that has taken him from the beaches of North Africa to the heart of the shattered Reich. He is a man who has spent 3 years directing one of the most devastating military machines in human history. He has little patience left for anything and absolutely none for pretension. Into this room walks an SS general, not a broken man, not a repentant one, a man who, even in defeat, carries himself with the rigid, rehearsed authority of the Nazi state. He is immaculately dressed, his uniform pressed as though the last 6 years had been nothing more than an extended exercise. He extends his hand, he introduces himself by rank, and then, with a breathtaking absence of self-awareness, he demands to be treated as an equal. Patton looks at him for a long moment. The room goes quiet. Every aide, every officer present holds their breath. What will the general do? Patton was famous, after all, for his volcanic temper, his theatrical flair, his love of a moment. This was certainly a moment. He gave the SS officer 3 words. Get out, now. It is a story that has circulated among historians and veterans for decades, brief, almost dismissible as mere anecdote. But those 3 words and the extraordinary presumption that prompted them open a window onto something far larger. The psychology of the defeated Nazi military class, the complexity of the Allied occupation, and the specific, uncompromising character of the man who became one of America's most celebrated and most controversial generals. To understand why an SS general would make such a demand, you must first understand what the SS believed itself to be. The Schutzstaffel was not, in the minds of its senior members, simply an arm of the German military. It was an ideological vanguard, a racial aristocracy, the living embodiment of the new order that National Socialism had promised to build. SS generals did not think of themselves as soldiers in any conventional sense. They thought of themselves as crusaders. By 1944 and into 1945, the SS had expanded enormously. The Waffen-SS, its military wing, had grown from a handful of elite divisions into a sprawling force of nearly 1 million men. It fought alongside the Wehrmacht on every front, and in the minds of Himmler and Hitler, it represented the ideologically pure spearhead of German arms. SS officers were trained not merely in tactics and strategy, but in the belief that they were inherently superior to their enemies, to the civilians they occupied, and in many respects to the regular German army itself. This bred a particular and peculiar form of arrogance. Even as Germany collapsed around them, as the Reich's cities burned and its armies dissolved under the weight of Allied power, many senior SS officers clung to the belief that they had been betrayed, not defeated, that the cause had been noble, that they themselves remained honourable men of war, and that, as such, they deserved the courtesies extended to any professional soldier under the conventions of military conduct. It was a monstrous delusion. By the spring of 1945, the crimes of the SS were becoming horrifyingly clear to the Allied armies advancing through Germany and liberated Europe. Concentration camps, mass shootings, the systematic extermination of entire peoples, the evidence was everywhere. American soldiers who had liberated Buchenwald and Dachau did not look at an SS general and see a professional colleague. They saw something else entirely. George Patton had seen the camps. He had ordered his own soldiers into them, had reportedly been physically ill at what he witnessed, had in some cases forced local German civilians to walk through the facilities so they could not claim ignorance. Whatever Patton's many and well-documented failings, whatever the contradictions of his complex character, he was not a man who could stand in front of an SS officer and pretend. Patton himself was a figure of extraordinary contradictions. Born in 1885 into a family with deep military roots, he had grown up steeped in the romantic mythology of soldiering. He read classical history with genuine passion, believed in reincarnation and that he had fought in battles across centuries, and cultivated a public persona of theatrical aggression that was partly genuine and partly carefully constructed performance. He carried ivory-handled revolvers, he wore polished boots in the field, he slapped a hospitalized soldier in Sicily and nearly ended his career. He was also, by any honest assessment, one of the most gifted operational commanders of the entire war. The Third Army's breakout from Normandy in the summer of 1944 was a masterpiece of mobile warfare. His rapid pivot to relieve Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge, turning an entire army 90 degrees in winter conditions in under 3 days, remains one of the most astonishing logistical feats in military history. Allied commanders, German commanders, and subsequent military historians have all acknowledged that Patton had a rare and genuine talent for the art of war. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. There is a great deal more history like this to come. But genius and virtue are not the same thing, and Patton knew it better than most. He was capable of breathtaking cruelty and startling tenderness in the same afternoon. He could quote scripture and Homer in the same breath. He was, in short, a man of enormous and sometimes frightening humanity, with all the contradictions that implies, which is precisely why his response to the SS general cut so deeply. 3 words. No theatrical outburst, no speech, no lecture about the crimes of the Reich. Simply, get out, now. In those 3 words, Patton refused something that the SS officer had almost certainly never been refused before, the dignity of acknowledgement. He did not argue with the man, he did not explain his reasoning, he did not grant him the status of an adversary worth addressing. He simply erased him from the room. Accounts of similar incidents with German officers, and particularly SS officers, in the immediate post-war period reveal a pattern that historians have found both fascinating and troubling. A significant number of senior German officers, when captured or surrendering, attempted to invoke the Geneva Conventions and the customs of military chivalry that governed the treatment of prisoners of war. Some went further, attempting to present themselves as professional soldiers who had merely served their country, and who therefore deserved the respect of their Allied counterparts. American and British commanders responded to this with varying degrees of patience. Some, particularly those who had not witnessed the camps directly, were more willing to engage in the rituals of military courtesy. Others were not. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery famously received the German surrender at Lüneburg Heath in May 1945 with a pointed refusal to offer the German delegation any comfort or ceremony beyond the bare minimum the moment required. Eisenhower refused to meet with senior German officers at all in the immediate aftermath, a deliberate signal that no equivalence was being drawn. Patton's response was perhaps the most economical of all. Where others might have delivered a lecture or a rebuke, he simply applied the only answer the situation merited. There was nothing to say. There was nothing to discuss. The presumption of equality was so absurd, so grotesque in its context, that engaging with it at all would have been its own kind of insult, an insult to every soldier who had died fighting the Reich, and to every victim the SS had left in its wake. The broader story of what happened to SS officers in the aftermath of the war is a complicated, and in many respects, deeply unsatisfying one. Nuremberg brought some of the most senior figures in the Nazi hierarchy to justice, and several SS commanders were tried and executed. But the sheer scale of the SS, by 1945, it was a vast organization with hundreds of thousands of members, meant that the majority of its officers and men were never prosecuted. Many were released after relatively brief internment. Some found their way into the post-war West German military or intelligence services. A number escaped to South America, with the assistance of rat lines facilitated in part by sympathetic elements within various institutions. The dream of equality that the SS general carried into Patton's office that day, the idea that the conventions of military honor could erase or transcend what the SS had actually done, did not die easily. It persisted for years, surfacing in the memoirs of former officers who described themselves as soldiers first, and ideologues never, in the revisionist histories that portrayed the Waffen-SS as simply another military force fighting a conventional war on the Eastern Front. History has not been kind to that argument. The Nuremberg Tribunal declared the SS a criminal organization. Subsequent scholarship has documented the Waffen-SS's direct participation in massacres, in the murder of prisoners of war, in the enforcement of the extermination program across occupied Europe. The pretense of clean soldiering was exactly that, a pretense, which returns us to that room in Bavaria, to the pressed uniform and the extended hand, and the demand, the extraordinary, audacious demand, to be treated as an equal. What did the SS general expect? Perhaps he expected what many senior German officers received, a cold courtesy, a grudging professionalism, the acknowledgement that however terrible the war had been, soldiers on both sides had done what soldiers do. Perhaps he expected Patton, of all people, a man famous for his love of martial drama, to respond to the gesture of one warrior addressing another. He did not know his man. Patton had ridden through the ruins of a continent. He had walked through Buchenwald. He had read the dispatches and seen the photographs and heard the testimony of survivors. He had commanded men who had died in their thousands to end exactly what this officer in his pressed uniform represented. And now this man stood in front of him and asked to be seen as a peer. 3 words. There is a temptation in telling stories like this to make them morally tidy, to use them as illustrations of clear and simple truths. But history is rarely tidy, and Patton himself is a reminder of that. The same man who dismissed the SS general with 3 words would, within weeks, make statements about the denazification process in occupied Germany that would scandalize Washington and ultimately cost him his command. He suggested in public that the difference between Nazi Party members and other Germans was not so very great, that it was not unlike the difference between Democrats and Republicans at home. Eisenhower relieved him of command in October 1945. He died in December of that year from injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident near Mannheim. He was 60 years old. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for a war he believed he was born to fight, and having fought it brilliantly, he did not survive long enough to struggle with its aftermath. Perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps it is simply sad. But what remains, what endures across the decades, is that moment in Bavaria, the pressed uniform, the extended hand, the demand, and the response that required no explanation, no justification, no historical footnote to make its meaning clear. Get out. Now. In a war fought over the most fundamental questions about human dignity and the limits of power, those three words said everything. The man who spoke them was flawed, complicated, and sometimes wrong. But in that moment, in that room, with that particular person standing before him, he was exactly right. Some things do not require a speech. Some statements need only 3 words, and some silences, in their own way, speak louder than anything.